After the Super Bowl is when we get a real sense of exactly how teams are viewing these prospects. We have a much better idea of what order they're going to be going into the draft, what teams are interested in who, and this is because everybody's talking to each other at Radio Row. I mean, you have people touching elbows, you have people talking prospects, and now this is going to be the only thing we focus in on for the next coming months. So we're going to be looking at an updated mock draft coming out from Trevor Sikkema at PFF, and this is post Super Bowl. Already looks like it's pretty much consensus that you will have Caleb Williams at 1 to the Chicago Bears. Now, Caleb Williams will be my 101 in Superflex rookie drafts. If he does go to Chicago, it's even going to be better when you look at what wide receiver the Bears took later on in this mock draft. But nonetheless, I mean, right now, it does seem like this is a quarterback that has a ton of rushing upside. This is a quarterback that I believe will be stepping into a much better situation than what a number 1 overall pick is used to being in. Now, yes, I understand everybody wants to come out and go, Mason, are you an idiot? Mason, this is one of the worst situations you could ever imagine. Look what they did to Justin Fields. Guys, when you're looking at these quarterbacks that go number 1 overall in the NFL draft, 9 times out of 10, the reason they are going number 1 overall is the team selecting there was just the worst team in the NFL. You're never stepping into a Brock Purdy type situation if you are inside the top 3 NFL draft picks. Now, with that being said, Chicago with DJ Moore, Chicago with the ability to just go out and spend a ridiculous amount of money this offseason, presumably get some value from Justin Fields in a trade, and also the wide receiver they'll take later on in this mock draft. I think it's actually a much better spot than what we're used to seeing from teams with the number 1 overall pick. So I actually like Caleb Williams here, and he's my 101 in Superflex rookie drafts. Now, going over to our 102, this is an interesting spot, and y'all will see that I change my mind, and we go back and forth with these guys 2, 3, 4. I'm going to give it to Drake May in this one. I mean, it seems like we're giving it to a different player each time. The reason being is Trevor Sikkema has the Denver Broncos trading up to the 2nd overall pick to select Drake May here. He is saying that the Broncos are going to be giving up the 2024 12th overall pick, a 2025 first round pick, a 2025 second round pick, and a 2026 first round pick. Now, if Washington were to be able to pull this trade off, they 100% should, right? I mean, the only way this trade works out for Denver is if Drake May turns out to be the next CJ Stroud, which probably isn't happening, but nonetheless, this level of investment into a quarterback will give him a ton of job security. He does have rushing upside at the same time. This quarterback that 2 years ago had 700 rushing yards at UNC. So you're telling me that a team moves up and pays everything in the world to get him. He has rushing upside. His name's not Trey Lance. We will go ahead and we will take him here. Wouldn't be that bad of a spot going over to Denver. Now, our next guy, not much to talk about. Marvin Harrison Jr., 103, goes to Arizona. I mean, pretty much if New England passes on Harrison, Arizona will be taking him, right? I don't necessarily think too many people are going to argue against that. This is the number 2 guy in the class in targets per route run, number 1 in his touchdown rate, number 3 in yards per route run, number 4 in his dominator rating, and he's one of the youngest wide receivers in the class, played alongside other top talent at Ohio State. Clearly the best wide receiver that we have seen probably since Jamar Chase. Now, going over to our next guy, Jaden Daniels is someone else that you can make a strong argument to have as high as number 2 overall. Now, Jaden Daniels does go to the New England Patriots. Obviously, this is a quarterback that I've been very excited about all offseason based off rushing upside, where he had 1,100 rushing yards this past season at LSU. And if you're telling me he's the top 3 pick, unless his name's Trey Lance, he's going to get to start multiple seasons in the NFL. So even if he's bad from real life perspective, it simply won't matter because he's going to score a ton of rushing production. Now, let's go down to our next guy. I am really wanting to say Malik Nabers to the 105 regardless, and I will have Malik Nabers here at pick 5. He finds himself the worst situation between him and Rome, though. He goes to the Chicago Bears at 9. Now, with Chicago, imagine this offense. DJ Moore, Malik Nabers, Caleb Williams. They also have money to spend in free agency. This is a team that also is probably going to get another day 2 pick, either round 2 or round 3 pick for Justin Fields. They set themselves up in such a nice spot with that Carolina Panthers trade. But nonetheless, Malik Nabers is my number 2 wide receiver in this class. I think he's inside that tier 1, the top 5 players. He is the youngest wide receiver in this draft class. He had the number 1 PFF grade last year. He was number 1 in yards per team pass attempt. He was number 1 in yards per route run. And he's playing alongside Brian Thomas Jr., another wide receiver that goes round 1 or presumably round 1 in this NFL mock draft. So I'm going to have Malik Nabers here at pick 5 just because I do truly believe that he is an elite level prospect. I will say Rome has a better landing spot though. Rome finds himself to the Los Angeles Chargers at pick 5. More and more NFL insiders are coming out here and putting Rome ahead of Nabers. Now, this is something that we pointed out as soon as Daniel Jeremiah dropped his top 50, saying, okay, Daniel Jeremiah is obviously way more tuned in than anybody else in the Dynasty community. And yeah, he had Rome up there, I believe, as his 3rd player overall in his top 50 big board, ahead of Malik Nabers. With Rome, he does have some red flags where he wasn't as productive as Nabers. He's not as young as Nabers. Keep in mind, this is a wide receiver that played alongside 2 other wide receivers that will go top 100 in this year's NFL draft. So it does make sense on why, maybe he wasn't as productive as these other guys. And at the same time, we know his freshman year was derailed by COVID. They only played like 4 games in Washington. So it does make sense on why he's a little bit of an older prospect. It would be a phenomenal landing spot going to the Los Angeles Chargers and presumably playing with the best quarterback that any of the wide receivers at the top here get to see in Justin Herbert. Now, going over to the 107. This would be a dream, and I'd be very surprised to see if this actually happened, but somehow in this mock draft, Brock Bowers falls to the Cincinnati Bengals. This isn't happening, ladies and gentlemen. I wouldn't be surprised if Brock Bowers ended up going to the Los Angeles Chargers all the way up at pick 5. Bowers essentially would give the Chargers both the receiving threat and at the same time some offensive line help, which obviously you're excited about both things. I guess maybe you just have him falling this far based off the picture with him standing next to Gronk. That can be the only explanation. I think most people are in consensus that Bowers is going to be going much higher than this. But obviously, if he were to find himself in Cincinnati, it's hard to find a better landing spot than that. And we're not worried about the capital. This guy's going to be a stud regardless. Now, one of the big time risers, and this is for sure something that I'm going to have to update on flogfantasy.com, is JJ McCarthy looks like he is cementing himself as the QB4 in this draft class. Previously, about a month ago, I had no idea, right? I'm sitting here going, okay, McCarthy, Bo Nix, Michael Penix. I don't really know how the NFL is going to filter these guys out. I trust NFL scouting departments with the quarterback position more than I trust myself. So we're going to rank these guys all close to each other. No. It looks like, based off what we first saw with Daniel Jeremiah and now all the other NFL insiders, and plus what I actually heard from Brett Coleman at the Underdog House for the Super Bowl, it does seem like JJ McCarthy is for sure going to be going ahead of those other guys. Here he goes to Washington. And if you get this capital where he goes at pick 10, keep in mind, this was the trade bag that you had with the Denver Broncos. This is still a pretty damn good spot. This is a situation where you have Terry McLaurin, you have Jahan Dotson, maybe they re-signed Curtis Samuel, but nonetheless, it's not like you have absolutely nothing at wide receiver. And on top of this, with JJ McCarthy, he did show some rushing upside, right? I'm not going to overstate it. We all know he's not Jaden Daniels. He's not even Drake May. But this is a quarterback that over the past 2 years has totaled 500 rushing yards. So I don't know, and maybe you can get 20 rushing yards per game, which is going to be better than what you get with the typical Kirk Cousins profiles. So something that I will update on our rankings for flogfantasy.com later this week. We just had a massive back-end update on flogfantasy.com. So we're still ironing out a few things with the developer side, but once we update our rankings, I'm going to be moving JJ McCarthy up dramatically, at least well ahead of Michael Penix Jr. as well as Bo Nix, based off what the NFL draft capital appears to be Right now, the favorite teams to land him, however, if you are looking at, I believe this is DK odds, you have Minnesota plus 250, Seattle plus 650, Denver plus 650, Atlanta plus 1,000, the Raiders plus 1,000, the Rams plus 1,000, Washington plus 1,000, and then obviously a little bit of a fall off. But of course, if y'all wanted to check out my Dynasty Fantasy Football rankings on flogfantasy.com, those will be updated for y'all, both our rankings and tiers, as well as all our overall rankings, all our premium content. And if you sign up to flogfantasy.com with code FLOG, you're going to be getting 30% off any subscription. Plus, with code FLOG, yours truly will break down your Dynasty Fantasy Football team in a podcast. You can find that link in the description and comment section. But going over to our next guy, we're going to be looking at Brian Thomas Jr. This wide receiver that maybe the production profile doesn't pop off, right? But going back to what we were talking about previously, you have to look at the context. He played alongside Malik Neighbors, a top 10 NFL draft pick, someone that I believe to be an elite level wide receiver. Brian Thomas Jr., only 21 years old, so he's younger at the same time. And here he finds himself a perfect situation where he's going to the Buffalo Bills. Brett Coleman, I believe, told us this weekend that essentially Brian Thomas Jr. to Buffalo would be what they've always wanted Gabe Davis to be. Just a souped up Gabe Davis. Clearly, Josh Allen is going to be at the very top of the NFL with his production measures for years to come. I think you would love it. Our next guy, I don't love the profile, but the landing spot would just be way too good to pass up on. Keon Coleman going to the Kansas City Chiefs here, pick 32. I mean, Coleman doesn't look great with any of these metrics, to be honest with you. I mean, 70.6 PFF grade. It's 24th in the class. Very bad. 1.94 yards per team pass attempt, 19th in the class. 1.87 yards per route run. That's 23rd in the class. I mean, none of these marks are good. Keep in mind, he did play alongside Johnny Wilson. Johnny Wilson will probably be a top 100 pick as well. Keon Coleman also only going to be 20 years old at the time that he's drafted. So he did play alongside another NFL wide receiver. He's also incredibly young, so maybe we have to give him the benefit of the doubt on why we don't like the production measures from school. But still, this would be a phenomenal landing spot going to play with Patrick Mahomes, and he would be a very different wide receiver than what they currently have with Rashee Rice, and it could be a natural fit. Now, our next guy is going to go very end of round 1 here to the Minnesota Vikings. You have Bo Nix going off the board at pick 30. This is actually a trade up where the Ravens get pick 42 and a 2025 third. And you have Minnesota with Bo Nix here at 30. It would make some sense. I mean, with Nix, he has some rushing upside. Obviously, not a ton. Don't want to overstate it. Be a very good situation he's stepping into in terms of long-term. If you have Jefferson, Hawkinson, and Addison there, I'm assuming that this would be a situation in that they sign Kirk Cousins to a short-term deal. Maybe still have another year or two of Kirk Cousins, and then hopefully they can transition to Bo Nix for the long term. I mean, pretty much trying to do what the Packers just accomplished with Jordan Love, but we don't necessarily know how it would go. But nonetheless, I mean, round 1 capital, so they get the 5th-year option. Now, I don't like this landing spot, but I really like the wide receiver. Here you have Troy Franklin going to the Carolina Panthers at 33. I mean, Franklin, 4th in PFF grade this year, 6th in his targets per route run, 5th in his yards per route run, 10th in his yards per team pass attempt, only 21 years old as well. Going to Carolina, we could assume that he is the number 1 wide receiver here for the long term. Pretty much a better version of what they wanted DJ Chark to be this past season. I mean, y'all know I've never been a Jonathan Mingo fan, so I think Troy Franklin would immediately slot over Jonathan Mingo with no hesitation. It just comes down to, do you believe that this coaching staff can turn Bryce Young around? I will go back to the video we just had talking about potentially buying low on Bryce Young. I think it is unlikely that Bryce Young turns out to be a good quarterback, but the percentage chance is still above 0%. Comes down if you're a believer with Young or not. Now, going over to our next guy, we are going to be looking at Michael Penix Jr. This is a trade where the Raiders move up to get pick 34. You have the Patriots moving back to get pick 44, a future 3rd, and this year's 7th, which obviously doesn't matter. But Michael Penix Jr. would immediately be in play to actually have a shot at the starting job in Las Vegas this year, which maybe would be a little bit different than what you have, say, with Bo Nix if he were to go over to Minnesota. But my thing is, 1, I probably like Bo Nix a little bit more than Michael Penix. Two, this is maybe not the best long-term situation here, where if you're comparing this with Bo Nix over in Minnesota, Bo Nix would have Jefferson, he'd have Hawkinson, he'd have Addison, where we don't necessarily know what we can expect in Las Vegas in the long term. Pretty much have Adams there for another year that you have to really pay the man. You have Jacoby Myers there for another year that you really have to pay the man. And then beyond that, I mean, we don't necessarily know what this Raiders team is going to look like. I think this Raiders team in 2025 can look like a completely different roster than it was this past season. So, I mean, it would be a shot that if you believed them, to go take your swing, but not necessarily something you have to do. Now, we're going to go over to a string of our guys, Hookamorans. Let's look at Jonathan Brooks here. Jonathan Brooks, we've heard him get comped multiple times to Aaron Jones. And with that, it kind of makes sense in that this is a running back that obviously is a capable receiving down back, 25 receptions at Texas this past season, and a limited year. Obviously, coming off the injury, it's going to be pretty damn tough. But going over to Green Bay, I think it makes a lot of sense in that he doesn't have to go out there and see a feature down back role immediately, but instead can be worked up. And in the long term, could be a great spot. I think Jonathan Brooks is the number one running back in this class. Just much worse than what a typical number one running back in the class looks like. Now, going over to our next guy, Hookamorans, we'll go with Adonai Mitchell. Adonai Mitchell, horrible metrics, 74 PFF grade. That's number 22 in the class. He had 1.68 yards per route run, which was second to last in the class. 1.78 yards per team pass attempt, which was 23rd. Now, Nick and Brett at the Underdog House, they were coming out and saying, Mason, just trust the film. Adonai Mitchell looks great on film. Obviously, NFL scouting departments would be willing to sign off on that as well. If you were to go pick 39, this is a team in the New York Giants that desperately needs a wide receiver. I just don't necessarily know if I can rank him over someone like Troy Franklin based off what we're seeing on paper at this moment. Now, Jatavion Sanders, Hookamorans would be going to the Indianapolis Colts at 46. I really like Sanders. Obviously, this is a spot, though, and that we can say, I don't know. If you were to select him in mid-round 2, would you be better off just going through and trading the pick for Michael Mayer? I don't necessarily know if Sanders is a better prospect than Mayer is. And we know typically these tight ends aren't going to break out until year 2, where you have that Trey McBride level ascension. Now, of course, every once in a while, you'll get a Sam Laporta, but I don't think Sanders is Laporta, sadly. Now, our next guy will be Ladd McConkey out of Georgia, going to pick 48 to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Obviously, this is pretty much everybody's favorite wide receiver, it seems, everybody's favorite sleeper receiver. This is a player that wasn't great in terms of his metrics. I mean, he did have a decent PFF grade. He was 11th in the class at the wide receiver position with his PFF grade. Looking at his yards per team pass attempt, garbage. His targets per route run, not great. But the man only ran 148 routes at Georgia this past season. He had to play alongside Bowers as well. Going to Jacksonville may be interesting in that if Ridley walks, then this is a wide receiver that may have a pretty serious role almost immediately. Now, going over to our next guy, we're going to go to Devontae Walker out of UNC. Another wide receiver that is very high in Daniel Jeremiah's big board, is getting steamed up. This is someone that I believe Daniel Jeremiah actually had graded out as a round 1 pick. Crazy enough. It would be a great situation going over to the Houston Texans, though. I mean, obviously, Nico Collins, Tank Dell were hyper-productive with C.J. Stroud. But, I mean, I do think that has a little bit more to do with C.J. Stroud than the wide receivers themselves. I'd assume that Walker's the wide receiver 3 on this roster, however, behind Dell and behind Nico based off what they showed this past season. Then our last 2 guys that went in this mock draft that we're going to rank will be Jalen Polk and Roman Wilson. Polk would be in a very interesting spot. I actually prefer him a little bit as a prospect. He goes to the Jets at pick 40, which is decent capital. The Jets in the short term do have Rodgers. But in the long term, this may be a situation that you just aren't too excited about, given the fact that obviously you have Garrett Wilson, who's going to be there for quite some time, and that we have no idea what Rodgers will be like in 2025 and beyond. But I think that's all I have for y'all. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button, subscribe if you play Dynasty Fantasy Football. And of course, if you want to check out our Dynasty Trade Calculator, all my Dynasty rankings, all my rookie rankings and tiers, all the premium content from all your favorite creators on YouTube. Find all that on flockfantasy.com. Code FLOCK, get 30% off any subscription. Plus, with code FLOCK, yours truly will break down your Dynasty Fantasy Football team with the podcast. But I think that's all I have for you. Really do appreciate you. Really hope you have a great day. And really hope we get to see you out with the video tomorrow.